Chapter 9. Andorn tried not to shiver as he stood in the cold. Nearby he could hear Yarlin snoring, and already the noise bothered him. Not only did it make it harder to hear sounds from outside the hut, but it put him on edge and reminded him that he wasn't asleep when everyone else was. Of course, if it truly had bothered him, he'd have gone with Mira and Thorgrim to the town and commanded Saria to stay there. But she'd already done a watch he shouldn't have truly asked her to do. He'd known that someone else lingered out there, someone likely to be more powerful, and he'd been more than a little careless with her life. If she'd fallen all the way out of the tree after being struck, she'd have been in a bad way, and Thorgrim would have been hard pushed to right the wrong. On top of that, he'd seen the way she was drawn to the forest, especially when that blasted solo wolf howled. Something about that creature was drawing her, and it had been prowling around all night. No, this watch was his, and his penance. It was always his penance. And worst of all, he knew he truly needed to learn this lesson. He couldn't make mistakes repeatedly. He just couldn't afford to. People were already depending on him again. He exhaled, watching his breath plume in front of him, and tried to refocus. He couldn't dwell on his past. It already drove him onwards, giving him no peace. Atonement would take time. At least he could make a difference in this town in the meantime. The night was at least almost over. As soon as it grew light, he'd wake his sleeping companion, and then he'd get a few precious hours of shut-eye before the rest arrived and they finally found out what was below that strange door. Several of the letters had referenced it. There was even a sketch in one of them. The bandits had been looking for something destructive, just as he had feared. It was just his luck that the people he had teamed up with had gone and found it and unearthed it. Somehow they now had to protect it, and they'd made it easier to find. If it hadn't been so dangerous, he'd have found the danger funny. Instead, he wondered if the gods were truly trying to make him atone. There was no way to know just yet, but he couldn't let yet another mistake lead to anyone's harm. He needed to get that door open, retrieve whatever the thugs had been looking for, and destroy it so it couldn't be used against anyone in the future. Then he'd find someone else who needed his help. And then the next, and the next, as he had been doing for the last 2 years. Focus, he told himself yet again. A moment later, Yarlin let out a particularly loud snore, and Andorn sighed. As he looked back outside again, desperate to get a clear moment to concentrate, he noticed the breeze lift the flap of the tent, suddenly blowing in a slightly different direction. He frowned. He didn't want it to blow that way and get into the tent. It would do a lot more damage. But for ages the wind didn't move the flap again. Then, suddenly, almost as if it was trying to get inside, it gusted and blew the flap wide open. As it did, Andorn noticed a swatch of light shine out onto the snow outside. His frown deepened. There wasn't a light source on the inside. The stove had broken, and that meant something was going on inside the tent. Something unexpected. Had someone snuck in while he wasn't paying enough attention? Had they managed to approach from the other side of the tent and go inside? The only thing Andorn knew for sure was that he couldn't let what was inside the sealed underground chamber fall into enemy hands. Another snore from Yarlin snapped him out of his blind panic, and he rushed silently over to the sleeping sailor. He both shook the prone man and placed a hand over the man's mouth to stifle the inevitable grumpy response. Yarlin almost yelled against his hand, cutting the sound off as soon as Andorn put his finger to his lips. "There's someone in our tent. It's shining a light out," Andorn explained in a quiet whisper. "Inside the tent? Already?" "Yes, but I don't know exactly where they came from. The forest has been still." Yarlin grumbled really quietly as Andorn pulled on his boots and handed Yarlin his. Within a minute, they were ready to head outside, weapons gripped in their hands. Andorn walked slowly and quietly, sticking to footprints they had already made and the most trodden areas to minimize the crunch of their walking in the snow. Yarlin followed, but his stealth left more than a little to be desired. They reached a corner of the tent first, and Yarlin moved to go towards the door. Trying not to startle him but wanting to do the approach differently, Andorn grabbed Yarlin's arm. Yarlin raised his eyebrows and looked more than a little annoyed at being stopped, but Andorn leaned in close. "Stay here," he whispered. "I want to know how they got in, and if there's a back door to guard now." Yarlin nodded, but didn't look too happy about it when he stopped. He folded his arms across his chest as Andorn tried to focus and walked the other way. Sneaking around the back of the tent, Andorn looked for both footprints approaching from sources out of sight of the hut and also damage to the tent that would indicate a forced entry. Bit by bit, he made his way round the large canvas structure, grateful the wind wasn't as strong as it had been. But there was no sign of a single soul, and he soon stood opposite Yarlin, the canvas flap and doorway in between them. Andorn held up 3 fingers and waited to have the sailor's attention. Not long after he had Yarlin looking the right way, Andorn lowered one. A moment later another, and then finally, after a brief pause, the pair rushed the canvas room, but there was no one inside. "No one here?" Yarlin exclaimed, waving his sword around and getting agitated. Andorn tried to calm him down until he noticed the source of the light. Down in the pit they'd dug, the door itself was glowing, and the tent was hot, heat coming up from it. "What on the sweet earth?" Yarlin said as he also realized where the light was coming from. The two of them stepped a little closer, emboldened by each other. "Something's behind that door," Andorn said. "Something? More like a monster or a trap. Do we have to open it? Can't we just bury it again?" Andorn sighed, a part of him wanting to do just that. Bury it and forget it ever existed. But in truth, they couldn't. "We need to guard it," he said, "or something could go horribly wrong for this entire town. I know you want to get paid more than anything else, but I know even you wouldn't want their deaths on your hands. Not if simply being in this tent and making a few thugs think twice about opening that door is enough to stop it." Yarlin nodded and moved a little closer to the glowing metal object, looking down at it. "Aye, you're probably right, but I definitely don't understand why we want to open it." "That's more complicated. Thorgrim insists upon it, and I can't say I'm against understanding what is happening here. I want to know what's in there." "As long as there's gold in there, too," Yarlin replied, his eyes sparkling for a moment. "Along with whatever else is there." "Gold would be welcome, but it could equally be cursed treasure, or old relics of a forgotten time. One thing is for sure, something magical is involved." Andorn paused as he held his hand out over the door, and he could feel the slow rise of warmer air. "It's heating up. Whatever is in there, it's creating heat somehow." Yarlin sighed before walking a little further away and pushing the tent flap to the side. "I'm getting the rest of my clothes on, and then I'm fixing some breakfast. I'll bring you something. I don't want to be anywhere near that door until the others get here, but I'll come running if you yell." "Noted. And breakfast sounds wonderful." Andorn's stomach grumbled as he spoke, emphasizing his words. It broke a little of the tension as he and Yarlin both laughed. As Yarlin disappeared back into the small hut, however, the silence grew, and Andorn found himself more than a little unsettled. What was behind the door? Anything that could create so much heat so suddenly was also likely to be some kind of problem. But the door continued to stay at a similar temperature, acting like a stove of its own, and keeping the inside of the tent a little warmer than it had been. He even warmed his hands over the pit with the door in while he waited. Although it made sense that the rest of the party had slept the night in the town, he was eager to have them back. But the breakfast Yarlin had provided was long gone, and the sun was already rapidly climbing the sky when the others returned. He stepped to the tent edge as Mira came around the side of the hut first, a long pipe over her shoulders. She wore her charismatic grin, hiding the pain of loneliness so well he doubted any of the others had spotted it. Behind her came Thorgrim, his pouches bulging with the supplies they needed, and finally Saria, carrying an extra knapsack of her own. "The innkeeper sends her regards and some decent lunch for everyone," Saria said, coming straight to the tent and lifting the pack off her shoulders. "Someone said lunch?" Yarlin asked, coming out of the house and up to her. She handed him the bag before she noticed the glowing coming out of the tent. Her mouth dropping open, she stepped gingerly towards it. Andorn filled them in on the most recent developments, trying not to leave anything out. "We got more money out of the mayor," Mira said, lifting up the pouch that Thorgrim had attached to his belt. As she threw it to him, he visibly saw Saria relax. Had the money worried her? Or something else? His reaction, perhaps? No. Why would anyone react to more money? She must have feared they wouldn't do something right. Tucking the money away in his cloak, he made a mental note to keep an eye on the group. It was important they all got along and trusted each other. In the heat of a difficult moment, you had to know the people with you had your back. As everyone gathered around the door again, the heat still emanating off of it, Andorn frowned. Thorgrim hadn't begun preparing what he needed to remove the curse from it.
"This isn't going to work,"
Thorgrim said when Yarlin pointed this out.
"What do you mean, it's not going to work? I've just guarded this frozen clearing so that you could go to town and get what you needed. Hurry up and break the curse already." "It's too hot. It will stop the ingredients from doing their jobs."
"Oh." Everyone suddenly looked to him, with the exception of Mira. When Andorn raised his eyebrows and gave no answer, Mira rolled her eyes and strode to the tent flap. Very sure of herself, Mira grabbed a handful of ice and snow and came back. Dropping it into the hole, she grinned. It hit the door and immediately sizzled and spat where the heat boiled the frozen water away. In almost no time at all, the whole lot was gone, water vapor in the air. As Mira went to fetch more, Thorgrim joined her. The second two amounts took a little longer to melt and bubble, but they too soon disappeared, sizzling away into nothing. Yarlin didn't help, but before long, Saria, Mira, and Thorgrim were walking back and forth with more and more snow and dumping it into the hole they'd carved out of the frozen dirt the day before.
"So yesterday we spend our effort digging this thing out, and today we fill it in again with water and snow,"
Yarlin said as Mira and Thorgrim dumped armfuls in without even checking to see if the previous amount had already gone. As Saria went to add more again, Andorn reached his arm out and stopped her. "Enough, or we'll have to bail it out," he said. "Thorgrim, ready to do your thing and break this curse finally?" The cleric nodded and sat on the ground beside the hole, pulling out ingredients and laying them out on a flat skin. Expertly, he mixed the ingredients on a wooden board until he had a strange paste and a brush of some kind to apply it. While he prepared, the snow in the hole melted, slowly turning to water and sitting on top of the door. Saria sighed when it became clear her next armful wasn't wanted, and they would need to unbury the door yet again, but not in a way that gave her much to do but watch. Instead, she hurried to the hut and came back with a large saucepan. "Fish the excess out with this," she said, "and let's get this done."
"Right," Thorgrim added. "I'm ready."
Once more, everyone looked to Andorn, waiting for him to decide if they should proceed. He tried not to roll his eyes, and instead focused on the door. It wasn't a decision he wanted to make, not truly, but make it he needed to. "Go for it," he said.